So thank you so much for being here today, Nat. Like I said in the intro here, I'm really excited about learning more about you and the amazing content that you're creating. So I'm just going to jump in and was hoping you could tell us a little bit today about your personal journey and what kind of led you to the creation of the Mindful Mocktail.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, first and foremost. I'm so excited to be here. So, my journey with alcohol, I suppose, really starts when I was younger, when I was growing up. I was a child of the 80s. So, we grew up around a lot of alcohol. I'm not sure what it's like there over in the States, but in the 80s, I saw my parents drinking a lot. And it's certainly not a blame game or anything like that, because my parents and I have had a lot of conversations about this. And it was literally just what people did. Daily drinking was really not unusual. The environment in which I grew up was a very safe, loving, happy household. There just happened to be alcohol present more often than not. So, every opportunity, I suppose, whether we were celebrating or commiserating, was a good excuse to pop a bottle of champagne or, have a wine or there was just always alcohol involved at every celebration. So I suppose, you know, growing up, watching that, you do just assume that is normal. That is what everyone around me did. And so when I got a little bit older and I met somebody and we moved out together, he'd come from a very similar environment where his parents, drank a lot too. And we pretty much just picked up where we left off in our homes. So we would go to work, we would come home. If we'd had a great day, that was an excuse to pop a bottle. If we'd had I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, if we'd had a shit day, that was an excuse to pop a bottle. So yeah, and we were drinking most days, sort of 5 or 6 days out of 7, I would say at that stage. Not to excess at that point in our lives. So I would have been sort of what would I have been, early 20s by that stage. Um, and yeah, and we were very sort of, successful people in, both socially and work wise. So, we were at that party stage of our lives. We would go out sometimes Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. There was always alcohol involved. We were able to then, we were younger, our bodies processed alcohol differently. We
Mhm.
could get over hangovers really quickly. We didn't have any responsibilities apart from work, work and play, and that was what we did. And we were both very good at our jobs and had good jobs as well. And looking back, they were some of the best times, really. I mean, we had a ball, to be honest. Like, it was a great time in our life. And then moving on, we separated, and after a few months, I met someone else, and he didn't drink at all, really. So he'd come from a family, ironically, because he's Italian. So, you assume that red wine and bread and cheese and pasta and everything flows freely, but it really didn't in his household at all. They didn't really drink much at all. So we had, this interesting contrast, I suppose, between him seeing me drink, with my meal most days, and then him thinking, well, that's really strange that you would drink every day. And I thought he was strange for not drinking, and he thought I was strange for drinking. And there was this really, it was never, fraught with sort of tension, or we never really thought about it or anything. It was just became quite obvious to me. I remember thinking, for the first time, mind you, okay, well, maybe this isn't what everyone does. Maybe people don't drink every day. So our relationship progressed. We ended up getting married, and just, it was just the done thing that when we would go out, he would be the driver and I was always the drinker. And once again, it didn't really seem to affect our lives that much. But then we had kids. And that was when everything really started to change. So I found the transition to motherhood really, really challenging, like most people do. But I would say for me, it really didn't come naturally at all. I thought that it would. I was, a bit of an overachiever, I suppose, when I was growing up, and things generally like came fairly easily to me. And then when motherhood didn't, I didn't know what was going on. It was really a shaky time. And looking back, and I've been in therapy and everything for lots of things that have happened in the past. And looking back, I really would have been suffering from some sort of postnatal depression,
Mm-hmm.
mild, but definitely there. And I was really sad about the life that, that was before kids. And I was a bit resentful, and just went through a really hard stage. And it was a weird time, because looking back, I was sort of thinking, that's it, I'll show them. I don't know who them was, mind
Mm-hmm.
you, but I thought, that's it. I'll show them. I'm going to show them that I can do it all, and I can, still, drink the way that I did and everything else. So I would drink once I got past the breastfeeding stage. I would drink most days. Again, went back to drinking most days, and sort of kept up the same pace of drinking as what I had before. But of course, the difference now was that I was drinking alone, standing at the kitchen bench, folding the washing, doing the dishes, downing a bottle of wine, and really doing it. There's lots of debate about the right reasons to drink and the wrong reasons to drink, and everyone has their thoughts on that. But I suppose if you compare it to what I was doing before, which was drinking socially to enhance an already good experience,
Mm-hmm.
and not drinking because I was sad or lonely, but I was using alcohol really after the kids were born as a way to sort of numb out the fact that I was feeling so sad, So I just started using it in the wrong way, and drinking alone. It was always the drinking alone that really worried me the most.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband and I, once again, we never really thought about it, because I was if there is such a thing, I was a fantastic drunk person, because you really couldn't tell. I was never a messy drunk, super high functioning. Got to the stage where he would come home from work, and quite often I would have downed a bottle of wine already, and he wouldn't even know. And I would go over to, where the wine was kept, and pretend to be opening my first bottle, when he got home. But really, I'd already had one. And then I started to do those silly things like taking the recycling bin out. And he was like, oh, she's doing extra chores around the house. Fantastic. But really, I was just trying to hide the fact that it was so heavy. And yeah, and it was interesting too, because I just started drinking differently. So I found that I developed this habit of, like, I had my wine and my wine glasses in this cupboard in the kitchen. And quite often I would keep my glass like in this cupboard, and I wouldn't bring it out onto the bench. It was like I was ashamed that I was, drinking wine. So I would go over to the cupboard, and I would stand there drinking in the cupboard, so that Damien and my kids, they couldn't see what I was doing. But the irony really is that Damien's my husband, obviously. He never had a go at me about my drinking, because I was so high functioning. He never really realized it was a problem. So I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to have a drinking cupboard where I stood there and drank, but it was almost like I was hiding it from myself. I was ashamed about what I was doing. So I felt more comfortable having it out of everyone's sight.
Mm-hmm.
And then really it all came to a head one day when it was a Saturday afternoon, and my grandmother had just passed away. and I had been put in charge of doing her slideshow for the funeral. So, collating all the photos and putting it to music and everything. And I'd said to Damien, look, we had two boys by this stage, two very bouncy, energetic boys. And I'd said to him, listen, I need to go up into the study and get this presentation done because I need to have it to the funeral directors by Monday morning. So I'm just going to spend the afternoon getting this done, scanning all the photos. And I took a bottle of champagne with me up into the study because I was pretty much incapable of doing anything like emotional or sad without the numbing effects of the alcohol. It's funny, you don't realize it at the time, but you look back and you think, gosh, I really couldn't. Like, everything was a reason to drink.
Mm-hmm.
I'm there doing my grandma's slideshow for her funeral and I can't do it without having a drink. So there I am up in the study and I'm doing this presentation, and I hear, and my husband, he's down in the kitchen, he's got our two little boys and he's doing his meal prepping for the week. So he was dividing all these nuts into containers, and I just hear him say, hey, Nat, can you come here for a sec? And his voice sounded a little bit strange. So I walked up the hallway and my son is sitting on the bench and he's got these nuts around him and he had some in his hand and he's having an anaphylactic reaction to the nuts on the bench. And we didn't know that he was allergic to nuts. So this was a huge shock to us. So his lips had started to swell and he was starting to cough and his neck was going red and it was frightening. But I just remember in thinking when I saw him, and this is like, it's not a story I enjoy telling, but it's just the moment where I thought, oh my gosh, something needs to change here. But I just remember for a split second thinking to myself, does this mean I'm going to have to stop drinking now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was annoyed. I was annoyed that my drinking had been interrupted by my son, who was having an anaphylactic reaction on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's not okay at all. And it was only fleeting, but it was there. And he got the help that he needed. We had to call an ambulance. He was treated at the hospital. We now know that he's anaphylactic to nuts and, he was fine. But really, it was in the days and weeks that followed that this little, that inner voice that you have.
Yeah.
She'd been talking to me for a while, but, she was like screaming by this stage. Like, that is not a normal thought process to have when you're faced with, your child in trouble, regardless of how fleeting it is. And that was when I got help.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I struggled with my drinking for about 20 years, but I was like one of those rock bottom like drinkers. And I think when you were talking about, how normalized drinking was when you were growing up, and really it's not too different now. And I remember, I've had other addictions due to trauma and whatnot that I struggled with over the years. And, I was addicted to meth for about 2.5 years, a very long time ago. And I always tell people, getting clean from meth was 10 times easier than quitting alcohol because you can just avoid it, right? I could avoid those people, I could avoid those situations. But because like alcohol consumption is so normalized in our society, it's on commercials, it's, at family barbecues, it's just so socially acceptable. No one thinks twice about, having a couple beers at a picnic with their family there, or a couple glasses of wine, or all these things, that it was just constantly in my face, and it made it so much more difficult. And I think there is a real problem with the way that we normalize drinking. And I think that's what creates a lot of these kind of blurred understandings of, do I have a problem? No, it's not a problem. It's really easy, like you were saying, when we're in kind of that gray area drinking space, to think I don't have a drinking problem, but yet we're drinking every single day. And just because, life isn't really falling to pieces, I think many people assume, well, then my drinking's not a problem. So I find that part of your story really, really interesting. So from there, when did you have the amazing idea to begin mixing up mocktails and creating this online platform that you have now?
Yeah, sure. Um, yeah, so actually, can I just go back to what you said before too about the difference, I think, between, meth or other illicit drugs and
Yeah.
alcohol? I completely agree. And I also think that what is really scary with someone like me, and without going into too much of my family, I'll just say, because, it is, private, but I was following a trajectory. So, of this innocent enough sort of drinking when I was younger, then moving into this more problematic drinking where I was using alcohol as a vice.
Mhm.
And based on what I've seen of my other family members, let's just say that there's one of my family members in particular who followed a similar trajectory, never stopped drinking, and so is still drinking now, and is drinking in a very, very problematic way. And like, as in full blown alcoholism by this stage, or, if we want to say severe on the alcohol use disorder spectrum.
Mhm.
So, and I could see the writing on the wall, and this is the thing with alcohol. Your relationship with alcohol can start off innocently enough. It
Mhm.
can start off just drinking when you're young with a few friends. And then something happens and you start using it for the wrong reasons, like to numb or to make yourself feel better or to escape life or reality for a moment. And then our brains get used to using alcohol as a way to escape and numb and everything else. And all of a sudden, we don't have the ability to do it without alcohol, you
Mhm.
know? And that's when it really starts to get scary. And that's, I think, the point. Like, if I didn't put it this way, I stopped drinking when we were coming into the pandemic because I
Mhm.
could see the writing on the wall. Like I said to you before, the drinking for me that worried me the most was the drinking that I did alone, and alone with the kids as well at home. I had the kids with me, and I could see what was happening in all the other countries in the news. And I was thinking, man, I'm going to be home alone for months on end. Like, if I
Mhm.
don't put a stop to this now, I'm really going to be in trouble. And thank God I had the foresight to do that, because I don't know where I would be now if I had drunk my way through the pandemic. I really don't. It
Yeah.
would have been a really scary time, not just for me, but for my kids. My husband, he was still working. Like, we were able to keep his business open. So he was gone 12 hours a day during the pandemic, and it was just the kids and I at home alone for months and months on end. And they were some really dark times. But had I thrown alcohol in the mix, wow. I mean, yeah, I don't know where I would be. So,
Yeah.
yeah, completely
Definitely
agree.
would have added chaos, I'm sure, to an already chaotic time, right? Where, I mean, emotions were running high and fears were running high, and there were so many uncertainties, especially at the very beginning when nobody really knew what was going on or even had any idea how things were going to unfold. So, and a lot of people, I feel like, fell into that trap, unfortunately, of even people who didn't necessarily have drinking problems before the pandemic. I think that stress and like the same thing you're saying, being home, having nothing to do, not having to be at work all of a sudden, just, the world coming to a stop. And there was a lot of mental health issues that were showing up that were maybe laying dormant in people before that, that I feel like had people running to these types of, like you say, ways of numbing out and avoidance of everything going on. So yeah, that is a huge blessing that you were able to kind of like pivot because of that into the direction you did, as opposed to, as you say, letting it possibly spiral in those couple years that everything was just chaotic.
Absolutely. And that was really, I mean, that's how we lead on to the story with the Mindful Mocktail, because, there I was at home with the two kids for days on end, doing homeschooling and everything else. And, if I'm being honest, like, early in those early days, just desperately missing wine. I mean, it was all that I wanted because I didn't want to face what was going on around me. I was watching the news. I was, hearing from my friends, the world's ending. None of us knew. We thought COVID might kill us all back at that stage. We didn't
Yeah.
know what was happening. Um, and yeah, and so I had always been like I'm a foodie at heart. I love food. I'd always loved cooking and flavor pairing and everything else. And so there I am with like this love of flavor pairing, and this desperate, this missing of this ritual of pouring this drink at sort of 5 o'clock, or let's face it, some days it had been 2 o'clock. And so I started making these drinks at home, these recipes. I would use the herbs from my garden and, fresh fruit, and started experimenting with some non-alcoholic. Actually, I didn't experiment right at the start with non-alcoholic spirits because I was very wary of, triggers and things like that.
Hmm.
So at the start, it was more about, herbs and fruits and everything else. And I just started making these drinks at home. And I really started enjoying it. That became my new ritual. Instead of opening the bottle of wine and pouring the drink, it was, okay, what am I going to make? Put the TV on for the kids. They'd watch some TV and I'd think, okay, well, what am I going to make today? And I started, making these drinks. And then, all of my friends were in lockdown and my family were in lockdown. So I started taking photos of them just on my phone and sending my friends these drinks and saying, try this. And I just had such a great response from them that I thought, you know what, I'm going to start posting on Instagram. I'd never done photography or anything like that before, but I just thought, you know what, I need to divert this energy that I have, that alcohol, I guess, had taken from me. And I had
Hmm.
all this other, like this energy. I was like, I need to channel it into something else. And so I started my Instagram page, and it was interesting because the drinks were always, a hit. Like, people loved hearing about the drinks. But what really seemed to resonate with people was my story. And when I started telling people about my relationship with alcohol and some things that had happened over the years, and, examples of what my drinking was like, and me thinking, I'm going to put this out into the world and see if anyone else is like this. And
Hmm.
oh my gosh, like, it wasn't just me. I mean, a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, we didn't really talk about this very much, or certainly none of my circles had
Hmm.
been speaking about alcohol and how it affects us in a negative way. And I just came to this realization that there were thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people out there exactly like us who can't, who've developed an unhealthy relationship or an addiction to alcohol, and were looking for, other people to connect with.
Hmm.
So the page grew really, really quickly. I connected with people all over the world who related to my story. And, really throughout that year or two with the pandemic, it gave me something to focus on, something positive to focus on and to channel my energy into. And yeah, and then the rest is history. I started the website, and then started working with brands here and there with their non-alcoholic drinks and spirits and things. And yeah, it's been one of the best things I've ever done. I absolutely love doing it. So I work part-time on it now, and then, I still help out in the family business too. But yeah, the 3 days that I'm working on the Mindful Mocktail are by far my highlights of the week.
What a fun journey and fun experience. And, at a time when we could definitely be focused on all the negatives that were coming forth in the collective during that time, I think it's refreshing to hear stories like your own where it actually created the space for you to learn this new aspect of yourself and kind of like birth this passion that you have. And so I think that's such a positive story in the middle of all that chaos we were talking about, for sure. What would you say surprised you the most about getting sober? Or what were some of the things, I should say, that really surprised you the most? And what have some of the positives been that you've noticed along this journey?
I think one of the things that surprised me the most was people's reaction to me, and as in my friends and family. So I got a lot of oh, your drinking isn't that bad. What are you talking about? It's not that bad. And it really made me sit back and reflect on how high functioning I obviously was. Here I am having 2 bottles of wine a day, but still being able to get up in the morning and parent. And it's a funny looking back, because in many ways I almost feel like I was putting on a show, like I was an actor on a stage. Like I'd wake up in the morning and I'd have this killer headache, and, I'd feel like just queasy, like I wanted to be sick, but I would like put on this happy face and just pretend that wasn't happening, and almost like made myself like mind over matter type thing,
Mm-hmm.
made myself believe that that wasn't happening and that I wasn't feeling so unwell. And because I did that, no one around me really knew how bad my drinking really was. So I think that surprised me quite a bit, just almost having to try and convince people that my drinking was as bad as what I was saying, because I was
Yeah.
just so good at hiding it. And then, as an aside to that, I really thought, gosh, if I stop drinking, I'm going to lose friends. What are people going to think? Obviously, when you're a drinker or a heavy drinker, you build a life around you that involves people that are also drinkers,
Mm-hmm.
and which is what I'd done. And I really thought that people would care, I suppose, that I wasn't drinking anymore, like that it was somehow going to affect them if I didn't drink.
Mm-hmm.
And I have just been pleasantly surprised by people's reactions. And I've realized like all my friends are still drinkers. Um, and they really don't care that I don't drink. People only care if they can drink. As long as you're not stopping them from drinking, they don't care. They
Yeah.
don't care if you're not drinking. So, and look, I have lots of conversations with my friends about alcohol and the effects of alcohol and everything else, but never in a preachy way. And I always just think people can see what I'm doing. They'll get there on their own, kind of thing,
Right.
if alcohol ever becomes a problem for them, just like I had to. So, yeah, they would be, I guess, a couple of the things that surprised me the most. And then the positives out of stopping, there's too many to mention.
Yeah.
Really, if I can just start in the morning, just waking up, having have slept properly, like not waking up multiple times, not waking up with that horrible, like dry mouth, like thumping headache, and even little things like, I never used to take my makeup off or anything before bed, because I was always just too drunk and I would just like literally pass out on the pillow. So I'd wake up with like dried makeup all over my face and, like bags under my eyes from the mascara, and go and stand in the mirror and be like, what the, like, what? You've done it again, Nat. Like, what? And that's just a terrible way to start your days.
Yeah.
Like, what a horrible way to start, standing there looking in the mirror, swearing at yourself and asking, what are you doing? Now when I wake up, I don't always sleep 100%, but man, like at least I can look in the mirror in the morning and I'm happy with what is staring back at me.
Mm-hmm. I
So,
find that even on my most exhausted morning, say I had a late night or I was up for whatever reasons, or I didn't sleep well because of dreams or all these things that interrupt our sleep, even on my like worst mornings now, it doesn't even come close to comparing to what the worst morning is after a night of drinking. And so to me, I'm like, yes, I can definitely do this. Like it's the best feeling in the world to know you never have to experience that again in my in my mind. And the rest I feel like is just seems so easy in comparison. Even when I'm running a little bit sluggish or slow that day, it's like at least I'm not hungover on top of that as well.
I know, and you imagine. I don't know how I did it. I don't know how I did it for that long. I don't know how I did it with a couple of young kids who were waking multiple times a night. Like,
Mhm.
I honestly do not know how I did it for that long.
Well, in a
But
lot of ways, I think alcohol is almost most dangerous for people who are high functioning
mm,
because they can drink, like you're saying, so much. It doesn't raise any alarm bells. A lot of times, even within themselves, within other
mm,
people around them, their life isn't falling apart. There's nothing to signal, hey, this is destroying literally physically my body. I've known several people, unfortunately, who the last person I know, he was only in his 30s, mid 30s. He was definitely a high functioning alcoholic. He definitely drank a lot, but he never really acted drunk. He never really like destroyed his life. And all of his organs, he ended up dying. All of his organs shut down eventually. And it kind of got to this time when he could have possibly like pulled through. He was hospitalized, he got out. The second he went out, he went right back to drinking. And that really, I think, is a testament to the addictive nature of alcohol when people are faced with these things. Like, like you were saying with your son, and that first fleeting thought was, oh, this is going to interrupt my drinking. And then you look at these more extreme cases where like this person's literally being told, like, if you don't stop drinking, you do not survive. Got out and he was dead within a month, basically, because it got to a point there was no saving his body. His body just started shutting down one organ at a time. And so in some ways, I feel like I said, like, that is the more dangerous drinking because it's so quiet, it's so silent, and it's not raising those alarm bells.
it's so true. It is just so right. And yeah, and that is the drinking that creeps up. Like, I bet he didn't start drinking that way.
Hmm.
That first sip of that first glass of wine or whatever that he had, I'm sure he didn't, he wasn't downing huge amounts of alcohol from the moment he started drinking. And that's the other scary thing with alcohol. It's silent and it creeps up over decades
Hmm.
sometimes. I mean, really, my drinking, how old was I? So what, it was sort of 15, 16 years of drinking. And when I look back on how I started drinking and then like that timeline of like how bad it was getting, and really like two bottles of wine for many people who drink is like, meh, when we're talking about people downing liters of spirits and everything else. But the trajectory for me is, well, hang on a minute. If I hadn't stopped and I kept going on that same pathway of increasing, 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 where would I have been in 10 years? Where would I
Right.
have been in 20 years? You
Yeah.
just don't know.
Absolutely. So, where can my listeners go if they want to check out some of these delicious recipes that you've created or learn more about you and your story? Where's the best place for them to go?
I would say my website or Instagram. So my website is mindfulmocktail.com, and there you'll find all of my recipes, and there's also a resources section there where I run through, some of my stories and, recommendations for the best non-alcoholic drinks. And then I also have my Instagram, which is the Mindful Mocktail. And, if you scroll back through, there's quite a bit of my story in there, how I stopped drinking, and, some funny stuff. I think so many sober people are hilarious because you've got to laugh, don't you?
Yeah.
Yourself, seriously, because, yeah, it's just, you've got to see the humor in it all, I think. So,
Always.
yeah, yeah. So there's lots of fun stuff there as well.
Perfect. And as always, I will have the links for these in the information box below. So before we close today, just one last question. What piece of advice would you offer to someone who is newly getting sober, or who is even just thinking about taking that leap and getting sober? What is one piece of advice you'd like to offer?
I'll speak to what really worked for me. I'm a really big why person. So I love having the facts. I wanted to know when I decided to really look into alcohol and figure out why it was that I found it so hard to stop. I started looking up things like, what is it about alcohol that is so addictive? And what is this chronic drinking doing to my brain, my heart, my mood? How does it affect my mental health? And I really think like education is power, like knowledge is power when it comes to alcohol, because so many people just don't ask the questions. I mean, for years, I didn't want to know. There was no way I wanted to know how bad alcohol actually was. But
Right.
I really think arming yourself with all of that knowledge can at least get you in the right headspace to say to yourself, okay, it makes you want to make a change. It certainly made me want to make a change when I realized how bad it actually was for me. So I
Mhm.
would start there, educating yourself on the effects of alcohol, and just start thinking about your why. Why is it that you're even looking in the first place? Because if you are, it's obviously not playing a great role in your life.
Mm, I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for all of this that you've shared with me and my listeners. I really appreciate you being here.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.